1. Most of my family have had paranormal experiences, and I'd like to tell theirs. One that has stuck with me most was a warning and a lesson told to me by my father. It's not exactly scary, but it freaked me out so much. I have lived to this warning since. I hope you enjoy. I had recently left school and got myself a job as an apprentice for an engineering firm. A month in and I was given my first paycheck, and I had never had so much money before. Being only 16 and yet to have any understanding of savings, I just wanted to buy anything and everything that interested me. A week had passed, and I was browsing eBay to see what useless item I would buy next when my mother walked in. "Oh great, what could you possibly be wasting your money on now?" she said, with an annoyed and slightly exhausted tone. "My money, Mum. I can buy what I want," I said with my eyes staring into the computer screen. "But if you must know, I am thinking of buying a Ouija board. Maybe we could do it as a family for a laugh." My mother didn't say anything for a few minutes. She was standing next to me looking at the computer. She suddenly said, "Well, before you do, talk to your father about it." I looked up at her and asked why. She looked down at me. "Just trust me, please. It's very important that you do." She then walked out of the room. After that seemingly odd exchange, I decided I would, so I shut off the computer and carried on with my day. You see, my father worked abroad, and I would rarely get to talk to him on the phone as he worked in the middle of a desert at an oil refinery. However, he was coming home for a visit in a few days, so I would just ask him then. A few days later, my father came home and decided to go to town to see a movie. After the movie, we went for dinner and then drove home. We lived in the countryside, so it takes about an hour to drive from the center of the city back to our house. We were just talking and listening to the radio, but there came a lull in the conversation. I suddenly remembered what my mother told me the other day about the Ouija board, and decided to ask about it. "Dad, the other day I was going to buy a Ouija board for the family on eBay, but Mum told me to ask you first." At first he didn't say anything. He just stared forward at the road and remained like that for a minute. He then took a deep inhale and exhale from his nose and started talking. "I'm only going to tell you this once, and you'll just have to trust me. And after I do, you're going to have to promise me that you will never use one of those boards." I was confused but interested, and I promised I would. He then told me his story. Note, I don't remember exactly what he said, but this was the gist of it. "When I was around your age, there was a group of kids at my school who were in my class, about 5 of them, and they would use a Ouija board. Every weekend they would go to one of their houses and play with it. Then on Monday they would come in with stories and tales of what they saw, plus what it told them. They would say to others at the school that it spelled out your name and something bad is going to happen to you. However, everyone knew that they were just lying most of the time. They even invited me a few times, but I never went. Not that I didn't want to go. I was just always busy on weekends. One of those kids was called Amy, and she was by far the most popular girl in school. She was the kind of girl all the guys wanted to date, and all the girls wanted to be her friend. Anyway, one Friday, the class were talking about what everyone was doing on the weekend. I turned to Amy and asked what her plans were. She told me that they were going to use the Ouija board again, but differently this time, and asked if I wanted to come. I couldn't for some reason, but told her good luck. My dad stopped talking, his face turned blank, and for the rest of his story he told it with no expression on his face, and in a stone-cold tone. I went back to school on Monday, but those group of kids didn't. They weren't in school all week. Rumors started going around the school that something terrible had happened to them. Some say they were all in hospital while others said they were dead. However, no one knew exactly what happened. A couple of weeks went by and one by one they started coming back to school. They were different. Before this happened, that whole group was loud, charismatic, and fun to be around. But now, well, they were quiet, kept to themselves, and were always alone. Their eyes looked dead, and they always looked miserable. People tried asking them what had happened, but they ignored them. The last to come back was Amy. When I first saw her, I didn't even recognize her. She had dyed her hair black, she wore a long black dress, and was no longer wearing any jewelry. But worst of all, what freaked me out the most. From that day on until the day she left, she would be clutching a small Bible in her hand. A Bible, who does that? A lot of people thought she was just faking it, and if she was, then she did a damn good job. Those 5 kids would eventually leave the school. I never saw them again. The car fell silent. I couldn't believe what I just heard. It sounded so strange. Too well thought out to be real. But I always trusted my father. Even if it was a lie or a story, I felt like it came from some sort of truth. He then turned to me with a serious expression in his voice and said, "So you must promise me never to use a Ouija board, even if you think this is all fake. Just believe me when I tell you nothing good will come of it." I asked him, "But I don't understand. What happened to them?" He sighed and said, "I don't know. They never told me or anyone at the school. I believe that those 5 kids are the only ones that will ever know. But I promised him I would." We spent the rest of the car journey in silence, just listening to the radio. I spent most of the time contemplating his story. If it was just a story, then why lie to me? But if it was real, then what did happen that night with those kids? So I never did buy the Ouija board, and I have never used them. I have even convinced some of my friends not to purchase one with this story. A few months ago, my dad had a school reunion and he took me along with him. While I was there, all I could think about was Amy, and I spent most of the night trying to spot her in the crowd. I didn't really know what she would look like now, but I had that mental image in my head. I never did find her. I'd like to think that those group of kids got better and grew up to be somewhat normal, but I guess I'll never know. I asked my father if any of them were at the reunion, and he said no. I doubt he'd even tell me though, because the last thing they would want is some stranger coming up to them and asking, "Hey, are you that person that used to use a Ouija board back in school? What happened?" My father even tried to look them up on my Facebook, but with no avail. I know this must have sounded far-fetched, and you may think that I have just made this up for fun, but I know what my father told me, and I guess that's for you to decide for yourself. 2. Last summer I spent a lot of time at my friend's house with his mother, stepfather, younger sisters, and my best friend. My friend at the time was gone, and it was just myself, the 13-year-old sister, the mother, and my best friend. The sister and my best friend had been telling me about a little girl that they often saw in the house. She would mainly appear in the 13-year-old's room. The sister told me that she always turned her mirror around and locked the bathroom door, and every morning it was as if she hadn't done it. My best friend told me that she suffered sleep paralysis and would no longer sleep in the room alone. I had never felt anything or experienced anything, so I sort of wrote it off as, "The spirits don't want me, it's fine." The next night we all had gone for a late night swim in the pool, and everything was going fine until about midnight. My best friend went under the water, and when she came up, she was rushing past us telling us that she was done and she was going inside. We asked what had happened, and when we were safely on the porch, she told the sister and I that something had her ankle and she couldn't get away. Right before the force let go, she felt a pinch on her arm and she felt unsafe in the water. We all go inside after she calms down, and she and the sister fell asleep in the living room. I went into the sister's room and got into bed, thinking nothing of it. I watched a few YouTube videos and then went to sleep. Now let me tell you how the room is set up. It's important, I promise. When you walk into the room, the closet is on the left wall. The head of the bed is against the back wall, and the large window is on the right side along with the dresser and a desk. It is important to note that the sides of the bed are open. There is nothing pressed against them, and a good 6 feet of space on each side. I woke up at around 2 a.m. and I couldn't move. I had never experienced sleep paralysis, but I'd done some research on it, and I knew this is what it was. I was doing everything I could to move, but of course nothing worked. I began to hear radio static. It was very loud at first, then it gradually got safer, and a feeling of complete and total sadness washed over me. I could feel something right behind me, almost pressed against my back. And while it felt like a person, it was a cold feeling as opposed to the warmth of a living person. At this point, I was begging my body to move, to wake up, or do anything. But all I could do was lay there. Eventually the radio static stopped, and I heard a faint but deep man's voice say, "Good girl." After the creepiest compliment, I say lightly, I've ever received, I fully woke up and was able to move. Everything in the room was normal, and there was no sign of anything having happened. I got out of there and joined my friend on the couch, and the next morning I told her and her sister about my ordeal. They simply nodded like it was an everyday occurrence, but it's something I can't shake. To this day, I won't sleep in that room alone, and I don't even want to be there during the day alone. 3. Okay, so this is something that was perhaps a watershed moment of my youth and life, though I didn't know it at the time. I'll preface by saying I'm not sure if it was coincidence or paranormal or maybe divine providence. I don't know, but it was something. So without further ado, I'm just going to tell it how I remember from my perspective. The dialogue is the best I can remember, a gist if you will. Let me know what you think, or don't think, I guess. When I was 11 years old, my Little League baseball team went for a 4-day camping trip during the season as a sort of fun team-building excursion. So whatever, we drive like maybe 2 to 3 hours to a pretty standard campground in southern New England. There was maybe a handful of adults, including my father who was helping out as a coach, then about 16 boys aging from 10 to 12. Anyway, the weekend was a total washout. The first day and night were beautiful. After that, fucking monsoon for 3 days. The parents made us stay because it was character building, but really the dads just wanted to drink brews without their wives. Third afternoon, everyone is miserable. I had the worst crotch rot you could imagine because of the wetness. I didn't even want to walk, let alone run around. Nobody wanted to do anything, but the campground had a huge lake. We hadn't gone in because of the weather. Even though it was raining like hell, we all wanted to swim in it because it was still humid and warm, and swimming in the rain is way less miserable than sitting in the rain. So, like I said, huge lake, swimming areas roped off with buoys. At both ends and at the deepest part of each swimming area, there were floating docks to jump off. Obviously, being competitive boys, we decide let's swim to the far dock and back, even though you're not supposed to and we have no idea how deep or whatever it is. I don't know how far it was, but far for kids. But it's fine if you can float and conserve energy. So we're all pretty pumped to go except for one kid. He was your typically scrawny nerd with glasses. He probably only played baseball because his dad made him, but he stunk at all things athletic. Anyway, we all loved him and called him the Professor, because he was a fucking walking encyclopedia. He tells us he can't swim well, but doesn't want to get left behind. I was only 11, but I was always big for my age, and parents made me learn early, so I was a strong swimmer. Everyone wanted to race, but I tell him, "Screw these guys, I'll stay with you the whole time. We'll go slow, no big deal." So everyone takes off and swims off to the other end, and by the time we get halfway, they're already heading back to our end. I'm like, let's just go back with them, who cares? But nope, he gets stubborn and he wants to go all the way. Whatever, he's doing okay even though he's slow, and I'm bobbing up and down, doing flips and backstroke, taking it easy. So finally we get to the other dock and I boost him up and make him rest because there is no shot he's making the swim back without resting. Meanwhile, all our teammates are at the other end, taunting us, calling us pussies and whatnot. So, Professor is rushing me to go back. Okay, whatever, we go. But I notice he is struggling hard on the way back, but he's refusing my help. Starting to get annoyed, so I swim out ahead of him a little bit. We're 1/3 of the way back, and all of a sudden he's yelling behind me, "Hunter! Hunter!" Not my real name. "Come back! I'm stuck! I'm stuck!" I don't even look back. Dude, I just swam there. We're in the lake, cut the shit. Like I said, I was losing my patience with him. "I swear my left leg is stuck, I can't move, you gotta come back." It's fucking weeds, dude. Pull them off and let's go. I'm not coming back. I kinda glance back finally and I see him trying to pull his leg up, and I'm still not concerned. All of a sudden, his whole body submerges quick and he bounces back up. Something's fucking got me. I can't move. Come back. Seriously, fuck. Bam. He dunks under the water and pops up again. Okay, he's fucking with me now. This is bullshit. Fucking stop, man. Not funny. Let's go. He goes under again, but this time it lasts a little longer. He comes back up screaming bloody murder. Something got him. It's pulling him under. Can't move. Help. I'm still skeptical, but his face is sheer panic. And I'm like, shit, maybe he's drowning. I swim back to him as fast as I can, but he goes under again and doesn't come up. I dive down where I saw him last, find him, and start hauling him up. Shit. I just let him drown, holy fuck. He weighs a fucking ton and I can barely get him back to the surface, and he is struggling hard. I finally get him up, and his face is pure terror at this point. Get it off of me! It's pulling me down! Get it off! I was just down there, nothing's got you. You're just tired. I'll pull you back. I'm pulling this little kid as hard as I can, and we're not moving. We're both getting real tired, and I know something is wrong. By this time, the other kids noticed something was happening. I'm screaming for them to go get the parents. He's drowning. Nobody fucking moves. They all think we're fucking around. I start screaming at them like I never screamed before. Finally, they realize I'm serious. 2 kids take off, sprinting towards the camp, maybe a mile away. I'm yelling for someone to come help me, but they're too freaked out to swim. Professor is struggling to stay above water, even with me pulling him up. I can literally feel his body jerking towards the bottom. At first I thought maybe seaweed or a branch. Now I'm like, fuck, is this some kind of snake, eel, some kind of freshwater octopus I never heard about? My 11-year-old brain is racing, thinking of mermaids and swamp things. I reach my panic limit, and I'm like, I gotta go back and get help. I just wanted to get out of there, get away from whatever the fuck. He grabs me like I have never been grabbed before, like I'm talking savage strength from this little fucking bit of a kid. You can't leave me, I will die, you will kill me. Get it off, don't leave me. It's pouring. We're in a murky-ass lake you can't see a foot down in the water. I do not want to go under and find out what has him. The gravity of what was happening hit me like a fucking freight train. This kid is going to die, literally die. It is my fault, I have to do something. I'm like fucking hyperventilating, losing my nerve by the second. I summon all the courage I have and dive down to his feet, not wanting to know what was there. There is nothing there. No weeds, no animals, nothing but water. I grab his leg and I am pulling with everything I've got. I cannot move him an inch. There is no way he can be holding it this still, on his own. This is fucked up. I start just like thrashing everywhere, thinking if something has him that I can't see, maybe I can scare it away. I'm trying to keep him afloat, dive down, pull him free, come back up for air, go back down. At this point I was exhausted, and I think I'm going to drown too. Where is my dad? Or his dad? I go under one more time and just pull with my last energy, and all of a sudden he's loose. Whatever it was let go. He grabs me around my neck so I can barely breathe. I'm like, do not let go because I'm not fucking stopping. I swam back to the other beach like fucking Michael Phelps on PCP. Of course, just as we got back, the parents are running up the hill to the beach. I'm too exhausted to talk. He's fucking catatonic. His dad is screaming at me like I tried to kill his kid. He's standing over me yelling, and I swear he's about to hit me because neither me or his son can talk or tell him what's going on. My dad came out of nowhere and I kid you not, bitch slaps this fucker onto his ass. Get the fuck off my kid. What the fuck is wrong with you, asshole? They're friends. Finally, Professor caught his breath and says, he saved me. Something got me. Was pulling me down. He stayed with me. He got it off. He saved me. He wouldn't leave. Now everybody is looking at me. What the fuck was it? You got it off. I can still barely talk. I don't know. He was stuck. It was nothing. Well, it was something, but there was nothing down there. We couldn't move, I don't know. Meanwhile, Professor has a giant red bruise around his left ankle, so swollen it looks broken. We're just looking at each other like nobody else can possibly understand what just fucking happened. Or what that terror felt like. Finally, it stops raining and everyone is calming down. We go back to the camp. Everyone is like saying I'm a hero. I don't want to talk about it or talk to anyone. Something was just wrong, you know? Professor won't come out of the camper. My dad tried a couple times to talk to me, but could tell I was fucked up about it and left me alone. Next morning, we pack up our shit, happy to leave, and start driving out. As we drive by the lake, we see cop cars, ambulance drivers, the whole 9 yards. My dad pulls up. What's going on? Girl went missing yesterday morning. We just found her body in the lake. Apparently she was a competitive swimmer, was doing her morning laps, and then nobody knew where she went. It was a big campground, so her parents figured she was off with friends. When she never showed up for dinner, the search started. They found her body at the bottom of the lake. There was an old fishing boat that sank. She found it and was filling around investigating. She got caught in some kind of rigging, panicked and drowned. Hours before we ever went to the lake. Me and the professor just started bawling uncontrollably in the back seat. It just hit us, everything made sense, and we just knew. I kind of talked to my parents about it after. But I was 11, it sounded crazy, and I hated thinking about it, let alone talking about it. Flash forward 16 years. Professor has never gone in another natural body of water in his life. I ended up becoming a lifeguard and joining the Coast Guard when I could. Everybody kinda knew why, so it kinda shaped my life. We went to different schools after that, but years later I ran into him at a bar crawl, and we finally talked about it. 4. My family and I lived in a townhouse at the time. We had lived there for about 4 years before things started falling apart. It was around 2006. My parents started arguing constantly, and each time was more and more intense. Now, I just want to say, I believe that large amounts of negative energy can manifest negative entities who feed on it. What was going on between my parents may have manifested what I started seeing. One night I remember walking upstairs to go to the bathroom. I walked up the stairs and turned to my right. Straight down the hall was my little brother's room, and to the left of his was mine. I got close to the middle of the hall where the bathroom was. I saw a girl in a white dress with long black hair float from the right side of my brother's room to the left, right into the wall, and disappear. She was semi-transparent, and I couldn't see her feet. Her skin was light grey. I saw the same thing 2 other times, 3 months apart. I told my parents each time. Of course they didn't believe me. Months went by and I didn't see her anymore. I was really happy about that. That happiness didn't last long, however. I woke up suddenly. I remember it had to have been around 3 a.m. because I could hear my dad getting ready for work down the hall. When my eyes snapped open, there was a hand, darker than the darkness of my room, reaching out of thin air for my arm. I didn't know what to do. I flipped the covers over my head and started praying. Then I counted to 3 and jumped off my bed and flew out of my room, screaming for my dad. I fell down in the middle of the hall and my dad came running out of my parents' room. I was crying, trying to explain it, and started crying more when he tried to say it was just him saying bye. I insisted on what I saw. I was so scared I couldn't sleep upstairs for weeks, not even with my parents. I felt like I was crazy. No one else had any experiences like that in the house. My parents didn't believe me when I would tell them. It was horrible. Eventually I agreed with them. Maybe it was just my imagination. A few months went by. I was sleeping in my room again. Nothing had happened for a while. For the longest time I thought those were the only experiences I had in that house. Until about a year ago, I brought something up to my mum thinking she would remember because she was there, or so I had thought. I told her about the time my dad was really angry, angrier than I had ever seen him. I don't remember what I said to make him so angry, but I remember him chasing me up the stairs. I ran to my room and slammed the door behind me. Before I knew it, the door was open, and my dad had grabbed me from the ankle and lifted me up. He gave me a few whoopings from his belt. I remember when I was upside seeing what I thought was my mum laughing behind him, peeking out from my brother's room. So when I told my mum that, she told me it wasn't her. She wouldn't have laughed at that, and she wouldn't have let my dad do that. I got chills when she said that because, when I thought back to it, I remember seeing only from the shoulders up of her. She was wearing white. Then I remembered the girl I would see. When my mum, brother, and I moved out, I started seeing the girl in our new apartment. She would do what she did before, except this time she was walking from one side of my mum's room into her closet. I started having terrible dreams almost often. Dreams where a tall shadow man would kill me. Those dreams were a story of their own, so I won't go into detail with them. I will say, however, the dreams started when I began trying to communicate. I asked what they wanted, and for them to show themselves to me, and I got what I asked for. In one dream, a face appeared on my cell phone screen. It was the decaying face of a little boy or little girl. It was hard to tell. I could just tell it was a child. It had pale skin that almost looked as though it was melting off its face, huge black holes where its eyes and mouth should have been, and black hair. My phone was vibrating in my hand. The face stared back at me as I tried to shut the phone off and began to ask, "Do you see me now? Do you see me now?" Its voices sounded like they were both male, with a very deep voice and child yelling this question at me. I threw the phone and heard it laugh just before the shadow man slit my Achilles tendons. I fell down the stairs I was running up, and the shadow man leaned over me in a deep voice and said, "I want you dead," before he killed me. My mum told me after a couple of years of living in our apartment that she would hear scratching on the hallway wall and the sound of something dragging on the carpet at night when my brother and I would go spend the night at our dad's. She even heard scratching in her closet. I asked my dad if he had ever had anything happen to him in the old house, and he told me that when my mum, brother, and I had left, he started having dreams of a girl in a white dress with long black hair and claws who would laugh and chase him through the house trying to kill him. He said at one point he was running up the stairs in a dream and she came up through the staircase clawing at his legs while he tried to run up. He said he couldn't sleep in that house anymore. I would leave to his girlfriend's house. My brother also told me he had walked out of his room one night to go to the bathroom. Down the hall where my room was, he saw a tall, thin shadow figure standing in the doorway of my room in the new apartment, looking down at me, as if he had been watching me sleep. I haven't had any experiences that have to do with any of that in about 9 or 10 years, and I am grateful for that. I wanted to share this, though. I would also like to share the dreams I had during this time. Eventually I will do that. I feel like the girl in the white dress and the shadow man were the same being. Has anyone had a similar experience or experiences? 5. This story takes a moment or two to explain, but it really helps get the perspective correct for later. I was 8 years of age. I am not sure why this really sticks out. I have plenty of memories growing up that I cannot recall my exact age, but this one in particular took place in the fall of 1998. I remember in part, I suppose, due to the terrible windstorm we had in the area just before the beginning of the school year. Anyway, the events all took place at my grandparents' home in West Michigan, located in the lower portion of the Manistee National Forest. where there are neighbors close by and the freeway cuts through only a few miles from here, it is still a rather wooded area. In every direction as far as the eye can see, large white oaks growing out of what were probably once sand dunes millennia ago. So seeing anyone other than the occasional neighbor on a bike, or perhaps an animal or two, was not a common occurrence after dark. I was spending the night with my other siblings and just woken up when I heard a noise coming from down the hall. My grandparents' house was long but not very wide, so noise tended to travel from one room to the next pretty easily. Even with the door open room to room, where I was asleep on a cot on the floor, it made it all the easier. Now and again, like all old homes, it tends to settle, so at first I didn't pay it much mind. But the more I listened to the noises, the more it started to sound like footsteps, or perhaps a car idling nearby, and I was letting my nerves get the better of me. But the more I listened, the more fear started to set in. I popped my head up quick, peering over at my grandma and younger brother. Sitting up, I looked at my grandparents' bed where my sister and grandpa slept. Everyone was where they were when I fell asleep. Now I was truly frightened. Someone was down the hall, and for the last few minutes were pacing back and forth. From where I lay on the floor, I could only make out a small portion of the hallway, the glow of the closet light making it hard to see into the shadowy doorway. I could make out the bathroom door and the dim glow of the basement. Someone had left the light on. Turning just a bit, I managed to bring the living room into view. As I mentioned before, their home was long but not very wide, and with an open floor plan you could see all but the kitchen from the hallway, which was blocked by a wall. This is the tricky part, and the piece of the puzzle that made me think for years that what had transpired was nothing but a dream. My grandparents' room is W-shaped. The door to the room was on the left tip of the W, opening into the hall facing the wall instead of down the hallway. I found the Goldilocks zone. From my position on the floor, I could see the office door, bathroom, basement stairs, dimly lit from below, and the half wall separating the living room from the stairs. Beyond this wall was a man, and as I thought, he was pacing. The room itself was dark behind him, but he seemed to stick out, as if he himself had a faint glow. All I could really make out were his clothes, long coat, pointed shoes which clicked as he walked, and his hat, tall-brimmed and didn't seem to change shape as he turned. We were being robbed, or worse, was he deciding what to do with us? The oddest part, after the initial fear, I became extremely curious. I couldn't make out any real features other than what he was wearing, so I decided to lean in for a closer look. But no matter how hard I tried, he didn't seem to become any clearer. Finally, I crawled forward. The flooring creaked as my palm hit the warped floorboard. Looking down for a fraction of a second in disbelief, I looked back up to find what I had been searching for. 2 bright red eyes. Curiosity became fear once again. The man, like myself, was still for a moment. I felt like it lasted forever until he screamed. It will sound strange, but I wasn't hearing it like I was his footsteps. This was different. It was like his voice was inside of me, emanating from within me. That made it all the more unreal and terrifying. While screaming, he bolted toward me, red eyes still locked onto me. Something primal took over. I knew I was done for. This was the end, and like the child I was, I sought comfort in the one thing that keeps the monsters at bay. My blanket. I threw it over the top of me as quick as I could, and I waited for what I knew was seconds away. And as quickly as it had started, it stopped. Nothing. I opened my eyes again, still beneath the covers. I stood there for a moment, curious if I should remove them, but I decided against it at first. Like with the placement of the room, this next portion again led me to believe for years that this was all a childish nightmare. I cannot remember much after this point, other than waking up and not telling anyone for years about my experience that night, until friends and I, in our late teens at the time, were talking about things of a paranormal nature. I brought it up during the conversation, and I only recalled it at the time due to sitting in the very room where the man had stood. My friends were all a little shocked. Their stories were of spooky voices or things they were told by others. Mine was a first-hand experience, and it made me feel a little uncomfortable. So I laughed it off as a dream. There is no way any of that could have possibly been real. One of my friends wanted to test it out. If he could really find a spot on the floor in my grandparents' bedroom where the rest of the house, minus the kitchen, was visible. I said, all right, let's give it a shot. So I stood where I thought I had saw the man that night, and my friends all crawled around the bedroom floor, when I heard one of them drop the F-bomb. With a laugh, one of them took my place and told me to go into the bedroom. I was a little afraid, and I'm not going to lie. What if it was possible? What if it did happen? Why didn't the man do anything to me? I swallowed hard and lowered myself onto the floor, taking my friend's place. As I looked up, that same fear from the night flooded over me. I looked down the hallway like before, the other 3 rooms and the stairway now completely visible in daylight. My friend standing dead center in my line of sight. It was possible. It did happen. I knew it to be true at this point. I denied it with a laugh and played along with their teasing for a while. The whole story crawling back into the far reaches of my mind until my grandma had a ghost story to tell. She was newly wed to my grandfather, just living down the road from where they lived now. This old house to her always seemed off, like it had an uneasy presence to it. Things seemed to move, and doors and windows once locked and closed opened on their own. One morning after my grandpa had left for work, she heard noises coming from the other room. It, much like my own encounter, started out soft and grew with time. Soon what was a distant distraction from sleep became too eerie to ignore. Soon she could hear someone walking around the home to and from different rooms till it grew closer to her bedroom. Lying in bed next to my father, who was no more than an infant at the time, she closed her eyes and threw a blanket over them, like I did years later. She waited for what felt like hours, until whatever it was finally slowly walked up to her bed and stood there, breathing. It started off light at first, but soon she swore she could feel his breath on her neck as he stood next to her, his face mere inches from hers until he walked out. Unlike before, he only made it to the door before his steps disappeared completely. But it was what she said next that really scared me. The one thing that stuck with her was the sound of his shoes, which clicked as he walked. As I read this, it sent shivers through my spine. I would later come to find out my nickname for him might have been more accurate than I thought, while retelling this story to my girlfriend many years later. She found a few articles about a mysterious figure known as none other than Hat Man, a figure usually dressed in a long coat and brimmed hat who instills fear in others. He is often associated with shadow figures, as he himself is usually described as being a shadow impression of a cowboy or desperado. Where a few have given him red eyes, I haven't heard of anyone recalling any screaming, let alone that which you hear inside your head. One thing's for sure, the dread is real, like a sense of death you know you cannot shake, as if you were looking at death himself. From what she had gathered, he seemed to be one of two things, neither good. A bounty hunter of sorts looking for lost souls or inhuman entities that refuse to leave the living world, or a manifestation of maleficence given physical form. Every case where someone had contacted him, they were filled with unimaginable fear or dread. I can vouch for this portion at least. My knowledge beyond this point is limited, but I have recently picked up a few books on the subject. It is because of these books I have decided to post my experience and see if anyone else could shed a little light on him. Update. It has come to my attention recently that some have considered Hat Man to be among the many creepypasta-style stories that have become popular on the internet in recent years. While I acknowledge that the name I have given my visitor is shared with this possible caricature, The experiences here are all too real. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 75. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm just going to keep this brief. I'm going to wish you all a nice weekend. Hope you have fun, and if you happen to be working, I hope your next day off gets here soon. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.